Good morning, everyone. I'm Beryl Unver with the Consulate General of Canada in Los Angeles. I wanted to welcome you all to today's webinar, USMCA in Effect, What the Deal Means to Southern California, co-hosted by Maple Business Council and the Consulate General of Canada in LA. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available after the broadcast. Your lines are muted by default, but we want to answer any questions you may have. So please locate the Q&A module and use that to post questions for the panelists and moderator. And now I would like to introduce Zaib Shaikh, our Consul General, the senior most official appointed to represent Canada in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada. Over to you, Zaib.
I can't really hear Beryl, but I'm hoping you folks can hear me. Great, thanks.
Sure can.
Thanks so much, Beryl. Thanks everyone for joining us today. As Beryl said, we're joined today by our Maple Business Council partners, Robert Kelle, Chairman of the Board, and Stephen Armstrong, President and Director. We're gonna have a great chat with you folks today about the upcoming implementation of USMCA on July 1st, Canada Day. And what we really wanted to get sort of folks getting a chance to know about is Rob and Stephen, your organization, having worked closely with our consulate team on behalf of NAFTA and of course its modern version, USMCA, over the past 3 years. But why don't you first briefly describe what Maple's all about and how we've worked together over the last few years to really make this a
Sure thing, Zaib. Thank you very much. And thank you, Beryl. So it's been an honor for Maple to work with you, your team, and your predecessors over the years. We actually have former Deputy Consul General Rashma Agrawal to thank for the launch of Maple in 2015. It was Rashma who suggested that we consider forming a business networking organization to promote bilateral investment and trade, having seen the work that Stephen and I, along with other Canadian expat executives, had done to launch and grow Canadians in Orange County, a social networking organization that we launched in 2009. The ironic thing is that when we originally set out to charter the work of Canadians in Orange County, we intended to form a peer advisory group for fellow Canadian expat execs. But what quickly transpired were celebrations of Canada Day and Thanksgiving and other social mixers like hockey games and a lot more. 5 years and over 50 events later, when Rashma made the suggestion, it was perfect timing for us to revisit the original business orientation and ideas of Canadians in Orange County, since we had built a network of critical mass to make the launch of Maple a natural next step. Canadians in Orange County continues to thrive as a social network today and is a great complement to Maple and a way for us to help consumer brands find a friendly Canadian consumer in the Southern California market. So we're doing just that over Canada Day, for example, as we celebrate Dan Aykroyd's Crystal Head Vodka, distributed by Orange County-based Infinium Spirits, whose president is also a Canadian.
You know, we're really proud to be celebrating the 5th anniversary this month of forming Maple Business Council, Zaib. And our partnership with the Consulate General has really been instrumental in reaching this milestone. You know, we've co-hosted events at the official residence in Los Angeles, been part of celebrations of Canada in LA, regional trade programs and networking on cross-border topics, including USMCA and SoCal. And it's all been, I think, really productive and certainly for us a privilege to work with you and your team. To be a little more specific, you know, our mission is to promote bilateral investment, trade, and entrepreneurship between Southern California. And for us, our territory, quote unquote, is LA, Orange County, Riverside, and San Diego with Canada. And we like to say that what we do is always setting the table for a meaningful conversation to happen. We do this through networking events, delegations to major Canadian markets, partnerships with some terrific economic development stakeholders here and in Canada, curating, you know, cross-border news and drawing the focus to what's happening that's relevant in Canada and in Southern California for Canadians. And what's been really interesting is the kind of the growth in storytelling and the ability to provide some platforms in print and in video for our members to step out and say, this is what we do, this is our mission, this is our passion, these are our insights and observations on what's happening across the border to help one another. And so all of this has been part of our playbook, so to speak. And we've been pretty busy. In our first 5 years, we've hosted 75 events, and 3 delegations to Canada, Vancouver and Toronto. Proud to be a partner of World Trade Centers in Vancouver, as well as Los Angeles, and a partner to the city of Long Beach. And so now today, our team is on the ground from our base. You know, today, Rob and I are calling in from Tustin in Orange County, but we have our team members in LA, San Diego, Vancouver, Montreal, and we're very excited to share most recently also in New York City, where we just opened our 2nd chapter. And we're really grateful to have highly accomplished business executives from a variety of industries and walks of life representing us to promote more trade between Canada and the US.
Thanks, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm having a couple of issues hearing everybody. Clearly, I can see you totally clearly. So I may hop out and then come back in just so I reset the old Zoom. It's going to seem like an SNL skit. But before I do, I know people are getting to hear you pretty clearly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a question and then let you gents roll with the answer. And hopefully you'll see me pop back up. The idea being, Rob and Stephen, that it's important probably for folks to get a bit of a highlight from you in terms of your membership, you know, the companies that you want to talk about who've contributed greatly to the economy in Southern California, and especially as things now begin to reopen and reset and recover. So if there is any members or companies that you think you'd like to highlight, please feel free to do so now and give us a little glimpse into how that membership side of things works and how this reset, recovery, and reopening of the economy is going to affect us in a positive way. And I'll be back.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Zaib. Well, so we're approaching 100 members in Southern California and across Canada within our community whose businesses currently span 19 different sectors. Originally, we set out to create an executive level community that's both cross-sector and cross-growth stage. So the idea really being that we didn't want to pick swim lanes and we didn't want to focus on large companies or small or medium specifically. We really wanted to have our doors open to everyone. We wanted to start with rich networking and really kind of start with that basic interest of doing more cross-border business together. But over time, we anticipated that certain sectors would get more focus based on our members' interests and shared strengths of Canada in our markets here in Southern California. You know, considering the scale and diversity of the market, we've got a lot to choose from. So we've got things like, you know, digital media in Silicon Beach, fintech, fashion, and arts in downtown Los Angeles. Many people don't know that LA is the largest manufacturing center in North America. Medical devices in Orange County and biotech and life sciences in San Diego round things out. So we've got a lot to choose from here to get into verticals when that time is right.
And an important dimension of the membership is that we also have members across Canada, as Rob mentioned, in markets like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and most recently, in just this month, we welcome new members from Waterloo and Cambridge, Ontario. Here in Southern California, some of the largest Canadian brands that we know and love have been here for many years, and they continue to invest in the growth and success of Southern California. Thinking about Air Canada, for example, you know, they launched their first flight in Southern California 53 years ago, back in 1967. That was the year of Expo Montreal. And they've grown over the time, you know, to be the largest foreign carrier now that flies out of LAX. Another one of our members, Brookfield Properties, who's headquartered in Toronto, is transforming the fashion district in downtown LA with a $200 million investment in the California Market Center, which was the original Fashion Mart. And it's going to be a destination space for the confluence of tech, fashion, and innovation when it's completed next year. And the TMX Group, another member who owns the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange, provides a pathway for Southern California companies to fund their growth through public venture capital through a listing on the TSX Venture. And that can be a stepping stone to a future listing on the NASDAQ.
There are many others as well, whether it's the growth of Toronto-based Technion, a leading commercial real estate interiors company, Avison Young, the fastest growing commercial real estate company in North America, QA Consultants, North America's largest software testing company. These companies, all Maple members, are here and growing their footprint in Southern California.
And then we had the other end of the spectrum too, the startups. Long Beach-based Krillix is founded by a husband and wife from just outside Toronto. And they're working with some of the largest brands like Canadian Tire, UK-based Gymshark, Shopify, to deliver for them and their clients' digital content campaigns. Also, Ottawa-based cybersecurity firm XA Hive is here in LA, and they forged a wonderful partnership with BlackBerry. And BlackBerry themselves is quite a success story here in Southern California. As we think about the fact that they invested $1.4 billion, that's billion, in cash to acquire Irvine-based Cylance just last year. And so there's some wonderful synergies happening between large and small Canadian enterprises.
And speaking of BlackBerry, in a recent conversation with a co-founder of a stealth mode startup in the high-performance electric vehicle industry, I was reminded that what we're doing is helping companies leverage the best of what Canada and Southern California have to offer. They're doing the design and prototyping of their first car in Los Angeles because it's the best place to do it, while tapping into the advanced technologies of BlackBerry and the strong automotive ecosystem in Ontario, also the greatest place to do it. So with this, they've got the hope to bring a high-end car to the market in Southern California, which is a great market for high-end cars, and build it in Ontario, in a city that was left behind when a large auto manufacturer departed.
Thanks, gentlemen, for that really comprehensive breakdown of not only who and what your members are, but how they work within the marketplace back at home, and obviously here in Southern California and really the globe. To sort of segue into this idea of partnerships and globe and Canada and the US, obviously when it comes to any sort of agreement that's going to be a trilateral force for the global economy, there's an amazing amount of organization and support that comes with that organization to be had, whether it's a campaign about the agreement, or whether you're talking to folks, or whether you're making sure that your federal, local, state leaders and those elected are hearing what the policies need to be, and what the statements need to be, and what kind of votes need to come in to those agreements. So how did Maple work with its members and work with all those stakeholders, whether it was on the political side, on the corporate side, or the community side, to really get that support for this new agreement? Maybe you can describe a little bit of that process, please. Sure.
Thanks, Zaib. And we can hear you well, by the way. So whatever it is that you did, I hope that's working out well on the Zoom.
Reset and recovery, as they say.
Right. So, from the very beginning, we chose to take our lead from the Canadian government in the Consulate General team here in the territory when it comes to advocacy work and lobbying. That's sort of not where Maple focuses. Our members are both Canadian and American, and our focus has really been on highlighting the benefits of these agreements with our members, not trying to directly influence policy, but just making sure that we're taking advantage of them and highlighting sort of the value. The government's got, a host of career diplomats with the necessary experience in policy making and establishing relationships with foreign governments. So where we can help is by listening and engaging our business community with a stake in US-Canada trade and economic relations. These companies joined our community because that relationship really matters to them. And going forward, what we can also do is keep the benefits of the new USMCA top of mind with our members. We don't want to forget how important this agreement is and how it helps all three countries in North America be more competitive in the world market. We just don't want to be caught off guard as we may have been in the lead up to USMCA. So really just keeping the importance top of mind is where we're going to spend some of our time.
And we'd like to give a shout out to our partners, because it really takes a village to promote, trade and to support one another. And the business community here in Southern California has been wonderful. Thinking of people like Bill Allen, Stephen Chung, and Mike Smith at the LA EDC and the World Trade Center, Los Angeles, the leadership team of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce, of whom we're a member, Brian Starr, Linda Demario at the Greater Irvine Chamber in Orange County, and the San Diego Regional Chamber, just to name a few. We also want to recognize the interest that the City of Long Beach and the Port of Long Beach have, along with our friends at the Riverside County Office of Foreign Trade in the Canadian market, through all their collaborations with us. Ourselves, we have participated in a couple of USMCA events over the years and spoken on USMCA panels. One that comes to mind is one with Global Chamber in San Diego and Pro Mexico, to participating in a great briefing of US congressional staff in Orange County, such as the teams for Representatives Harley Ruda, Lou Correa, Katie Porter, among others. Actually with you and your consular team, Zaib, and I think that was in Newport Beach. And in a way, everything we do ties back to USMCA, because we're focused on shining a light on the importance and the timeliness of trade with Canada for Southern California.
So, additionally, well, it's broader than USMCA. Last year, we worked together with your team and the LA EDC on a report that profiles the extent of Southern California's bilateral ties with Canada. And among other impressive findings, the report identified that trade between Canada and California supports over 1 million jobs in the state here. So this is the first report of its kind since 2012, and it's become a core part of our narrative as we get the word out with our members and others in the community. And it's a great reference for those interested in just how strong that relationship is between California and Canada. And a lot of what we do is Canada 101 and California 101 when we're talking about each of these markets with our constituents.
I'd add too that Maple was launched before USMCA was negotiated, and we'll be here hopefully long afterwards. So part of the value of our community and what we can bring is not just helping us get to the USMCA starting line, but to be an ongoing networking and content resource for businesses who want to leverage it once it's activated. Great,
thanks, gentlemen. You mentioned the report, and yeah, it's been an incredible resource, and itself took a lot of organization and coordination and data discovery and research. And so, as you said, not only was the formation of Maple before the USMCA, but that report was an integral part of what was happening in the landscape pre-COVID, obviously. Now, as we look at coming through it, hopefully everyone is as safe and healthy as can be, and looking at this idea of, especially in the Southern California community, business reopening, recovering, resetting the economy, what those things look like. What's your take on the economic outlook, whether it's in the short or long term? And how do you think COVID-19 has affected the locally based Canadian businesses here? Have you been able to see some pivots that were successful? Of course, there's going to be a lot of challenges that you described. So we'd love to kind of get an overview from you both, from what you're hearing from the members, but also what you're seeing with your own work.
Certainly. I don't think there's a business that has not been impacted by COVID-19, unfortunately, regardless of their source of ownership. And I think it's going to be a journey, to recovery, quote unquote, and what won't be necessarily clear is when we've arrived. I think at the macro level, we're certainly going to have some mile markers, the GDP numbers, jobs data. But within sectors, I think what's considered normal has already changed on us. How and where we work, how and what we consume, what we value, in our lives. So as we step through the stages of recovery, we're moving towards, I think, a new environment that's still in transition. But that being said, in our daily lives, we're seeing, pent-up demand to get back to life as it was in some fashion. whether it's seeing more people on our roads, people flocking to our beaches on the weekends, a desire to eat out again. You know, I stepped into my first restaurant since the pandemic began last night here in Orange County. You know, and all things considered, it was a pretty satisfactory experience overall. But clearly, we need to be safe about it. But the impetus to move forward is already here.
Yeah, things have really changed, right? But you know, I think we can also take heart that Southern California is an innovation-rich region, and that's not going to change. You know, we saw almost immediately when when the demand for ventilators, for example, was spiking, the local community coming out. You know, the Business Journal cover to cover was all about COVID and who in the medical device industry and biotech, biopharma was able to react and get into the game. You know, and also to mention, you know, what we see in our own work, happen to work in the pharmaceutical sector, delivering technologies that help track drug safety, which is, you know, a critical element as we race to get, you know, a vaccine to market. We need to make sure that it's safe, and, you know, we're helping pharma do that. But, you know, we're going to have entrepreneurs, you know, raise capital. They're going to come to the, you know, raise to the occasion and address new opportunities and fill gaps. You know, this is the 13th largest economy in the world with a GDP that's 82% the size of Canada. So, you know, there's the talent and the drive and a critical mass to meet what's next. You know, the challenge that we all faced with this pandemic forced us to work from home. Many trends really were accelerated, supported by innovative technologies beyond the obvious video conferencing tools like Zoom that we've become accustomed to and had to adjust to from time to time. And, you know, as you say, reset our world a little bit. You know, it forced us to put in motion you know, that ability to move and be able to work from anywhere through innovative work cultures as well. So, you know, even though technologies were there, collaboration tools were there, innovations were there, this is really accelerating our adoption of them. But we'll continue to innovate. We also need to support government organizations, you know, that can work this way as well. You know, sometimes the funding isn't really there, and this kind of pandemic has forced us all to think about how things need to keep happening at the government level as well as at the business level. And so, you know, let's be safe. But, you know, a lot of innovations happening in California and across Canada, and we see a lot of synergies there.
You know, one example of COVID-19 impacting an initiative here, linking Canada and Southern California, is in Air Canada's postponement of a long-awaited new direct daily mainline service between Vancouver and Santa Ana, John Wayne Airport, which was scheduled to begin in June. And, you know, Rob and I and fellow Canadian expats here have long lobbied for more air service between Canada and Orange County. And that goes back to really the early days of Canadians in OC 11 years ago. So we're really looking forward to when it's going to be safe and viable to have that inaugural flight. And I've got to say that we're both going to be on that flight when it's activated, and really looking forward to how that can help bring the wonderful communities in Vancouver and Orange County closer together. Orange County actually was the focus of our last trip to Canada in March, just before we shut things down for the pandemic. And we are always looking for ways to celebrate what makes Southern California special for Canadians to benefit from. And this flight will just kind of make that connection all that much more closer.
Well, thanks. Speaking of, you know, celebrations, obviously, Canada Day is coming up soon, July 1st, and that happens to be the day that USMCA comes into effect. And so in the nature or spirit of celebrating that, and given that we are hopefully coming through in a positive way through what the pandemic has taught us, challenged us with, and as we look to the future, what are your partners, members, the organizations, the folks you work with saying about how USMCA may actually be a tool to help in this post-COVID recovery?
Well, I think we've all sort of done a lot of shopping online. I think Amazon and other e-commerce companies have certainly benefited. Within our membership, Purolator International, whose sole focus is helping U.S. businesses ship to Canada, has for some time seen an increase in e-commerce demand from Canada, and that is certainly increasing now. Canadian shoppers are hungry for U.S. brands, and they represent a large and near market for U.S. companies to include in their marketing and sales efforts. So with USMCA, it's going to be less expensive for Canadians to shop online for U.S. goods. With the agreement, the amount that is exempt from duties and taxes, referred to as the de minimis value, that's going to increase from $20 to $40. And the amount that's exempt from duties is going to increase to $150. So those changes will support additional demand from Canada. But I think it's, innovative partners like Purolator that will find ways to continue to reduce the friction, as we like to say, of doing business across border, even directly with consumers.
And what we've also heard at a macro level is now we have a sense of predictability and certainty governing trade, with our largest partners, which is going to be really beneficial for companies and our members navigating through this recovery period. Having a comprehensive trade agreement that governs trade from 2020 to 2036, really 16 years, really gives that long-range certainty for planning, which we've lacked in recent years as we've been negotiating the agreement. I remember a meeting that we had in San Diego, it was probably in 2018, and we had a director of supply chain whose firm both sources product from Canada and sells finished goods to Canada, say that their business planning was just really hamstrung by the fact that they didn't know if or what kind of agreement they were going to end up with. And they just wanted to know what are the rules of engagement so that they can go forward and plan accordingly. And with USMCA coming live on Canada Day, now we have it. And it makes sense, that when every minute Canada and California trade over $85,000 in goods, ranging from computer parts, textiles, transportation equipment, crude oil and steel, that a modernization of a 26-year-old trade agreement that governs California's two largest trading partners is going to help with economic recovery. In the course of our conversation today, Canada and California will have traded over $3.8 million in goods. And here in Southern California, we export nearly $10 billion in goods. And if you're wondering what's number one, it's textiles. And another $5 billion in services. And it's royalties for IP that's number one. And that's on an annual basis. So we have nearly $15 billion in business here in Southern California to benefit from this modernization of the trade agreement.
Thank you, Rob and Stephen. I know for the folks watching, we've started to get a couple of questions coming in, but please feel free to, we're coming up to the Q&A section of this conversation with all you folks watching and listening. So please feel free to send them on through the chat area, as Beryl had mentioned, or the Q&A, and we'll, I'll be your willing moderator on those. But one of the questions I had was, given that it's going to be Canada Day and USMCA Day, how are you and your fellow Canadians and friends and even families, based in SoCal, how are they planning to celebrate this year, given that there are more than just one reason, not only to celebrate, but actually to, we're starting to look forward to things, given where things are at, and hopefully to celebrate where the challenges we've come through.
Thanks for asking, Zaib. So as you know, our sister organization, Canadians in Orange County, has hosted Canada Day at the beach for the past several years. And we've had as many as 700 Canadians and their families come out to celebrate. I think the largest was Canada 150, which was great. But, you know, in the midst of this global pandemic, we started to communicate with our fellow expat associations in the region, and we decided that we had to celebrate a little differently this year. Even if things were opened up by July 1st, and what we're seeing right now is that attempts to open are now turning into spikes in our local hospitals here, and Orange County is certainly, you know, part of that. So with the support of your team, we're partnering with Canadians Abroad Los Angeles and Canadians in San Diego to celebrate Canada Day at your house. So we're going to do a virtual celebration. We're really excited about it. Your team is going to be highlighting you know, some great Canadians who are making a difference in the fight against the COVID virus, including frontline workers, volunteer organizers, fundraisers, and there's even an Orange County company led by Canadian-born scientist who's working on a vaccine. So we're really excited to be doing this and to have a little bit of fun. You know, we've been hosting virtual happy hours and so forth, and that was part of, you know, what led us to do it this way. Some notable celebrities as well are going to join us. So, you know, we're going to hear from Ryan Reynolds, from William Shatner, from Laura Vandervoort, and Jason Priestley. You know, we're also going to hear from, you know, Canada has hockey near and dear to our hearts. So we're going to hear from members of the Kings and the Ducks, as well as the Canadian Olympic women's hockey team. So bring a little bit of hockey spirit to it as well. And then we'll hear some musical performances and some shout outs from our friends and family across Canada and Southern California, which is kind of something that, you know, if we did physical events would be really hard to do. So doing this virtually is going to be interesting. And, you know, we're excited to do that. But then separately, we also want to call attention to a celebration that's being led by the Royal Canadian Legion. I was unaware until, you know, just a few years ago that the Royal Canadian Legion has 3 branches that represent the Legion and its members here in Southern California. Which makes sense considering this is the largest diaspora outside of Canada. But so, you know, while the first day of July is a celebration in most of Canada for Canada Day, for Newfoundland and Labrador, it's also a day for somber remembrance, as it is also Commemoration Day, when they remember tragic events of July 1st in 1916. On the opening day of the Battle of Somme, 806 members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment climbed out of their trenches and went over the top at 8:45 a.m. as part of the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel. And in less than an hour, the regiment was unfortunately devastated, most killed or wounded within the first 20 minutes of battle. The next morning, only 68 soldiers answered roll call. So Commemoration Day was established in 1917, just 1 year later. And after Confederation with Canada, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador continued the tradition of Commemoration Day during the morning of July 1st, and they reserved the remainder of the day to celebrate Canada Day. So we're going to join the Legion as they broadcast this in a 45-minute Zoom event that'll take place that morning.
That's important stuff. Thank you, Rob, for highlighting that. Given what you were just saying about the USMCA and of course Canada Day celebrations, I just want to remind folks that are watching that to celebrate USMCA Day as well as Canada Day, you can actually post how important USMCA implementation is going to be to your company, your state, city, region, and please tag hashtag USMCA Day. And you can feel free to tag us or Maple. You can tag us, the Consulate, at CanCGLA. And of course, Maple, our partners at Maple SoCal on Twitter. And also feel free to hashtag Canada Day USA as well. So remember that. Those are hashtags USMCA Day, Canada Day USA, and our you can add us at CanCGLA and at Maple SoCal. Thanks so much on that. Now we do have some questions coming in from folks, so Rob and Steve, I hope you'll stick around for a little bit and get to those. One of the questions that came in from our watchers is wanting to get your thoughts on small to medium-sized companies and that portion of the USMCA and how it might relate to women entrepreneurs in Southern California.
That's great. I want to hit small to medium-sized enterprises. So that became pretty important to the negotiators. So it became a significant part of the agreement. And it's really important that we think about these small to mid-sized enterprises in that they represent 75,000 companies, exporting out of Southern California. Of the 75,000, 96% of those are small firms, and they represent a huge part of California's total export. So it's not just big companies that are exporting from California, it's small to mid-sized companies as well. And several provisions were put into place that we can get into later that help cut the red tape to make it easier for new trade to take place with those small businesses going north of the border, rather than additional red tape and slowing things down. So we think that's important.
I think on the women entrepreneur side of it, what I'm excited about with USMCA, it's not just the numbers and the kind of what we're doing together, but it's how we trade together and what values that we instill within this trading relationship as articulated in the agreement itself. So, within USMCA, we have gender equality emphasized, especially in the chapter 23 on labor, for provisions against sex discrimination by employers. And more broadly speaking, on values, the environment updates, and things like enforcement against wildlife trafficking, illegal logging and fishing, and marine pollution, the emphasis on clean tech, and what we're doing in terms of enforcing better livable wages and higher wages for labor as in terms of the requirements for the amount of parts of a car or a truck where someone is getting paid at least $16 US an hour. So I think holistically, these are examples of, putting important values to Canada that are also important here in California and the US into how we work together and how we trade together. And I think that's as exciting as, looking out to have an agreement that is a roadmap for the next 16 years and having some of the other dollars and cents worked out. It's this value component that I think is going to serve us all well.
That's great to hear. And in terms of those chapters that you mentioned, on the environment, on gender equality, on labor standards, those were really pushes by Canada actually to have those sections, those chapters, and in some cases, there are now chapters and real clear language. And in some cases, there's, as you said, Stephen, there's this idea of the tone of it and the intention behind it and the spirit of it. And we're hoping to see that as those, updates and amendments get put into the life cycle of USMCA, that we see actual chapters getting articulated clearly on some of those things that make this agreement really a modern agreement. So another question that came in is that, look, there's been a lot of focus in state and local policy circles in California about leveraging that economic recovery to emphasize the environmental initiatives that you were describing in green economy. So how do you experts and your members see Canadian FDI and Canadian businesses in California contributing to those efforts on environmental and green economy initiatives?
I think it's that strengths that we have in Canada in clean tech and blue tech, and the existing presence that we have here contributing to the long-term success of the Southern California economy makes it possible for us to do more together and to pursue these opportunities. It's not like Canada isn't already here. We're the fourth largest investing nation in Southern California. And we have demonstrated strengths in areas in clean tech and environmental focuses that we care about here in Southern California. So I think we have the mechanisms to bring businesses together through the work of the Trade Commissioner team and the Consulate General, the small part that Maple plays, the variety of expat welcome mats that exist here, the Canadian diaspora that lives and works here, and the strengths of Canadian entrepreneurs and established enterprises that are coming down here and have been here in the economy to help pursue these ambitions further. So I think it's a promising roadmap that's just made all that much easier, with the trade agreement.
And I think that, just to highlight, one of our members, Maple, had Brookfield Renewables as a key component of what we were doing early on with Brookfield. And if you take a look at their investments in clean tech, specifically in wind and solar and run-of-stream hydroelectric generation, we think that there's a lot of investment that's already taking place here by Canadians. And that investment is in large and in small, organizations. So I think that's great. And then I want to highlight the work that your team has done with the annual Water Roadshow. Taking a specific technology area and looking for needs within Southern California, and then going back to Canada and uncovering people that could come and meet those needs, with just a new way of looking at things, I thought was fabulous. So keep that up. It's great.
Thanks, gents. All right, here's another question. From your perspective, what is the forecast on the job market percentage in Southern California that may be linked or directly linked to USMCA in terms of that, positive outlook, I would say?
Yeah, I would say that that's going to be a tough one, right? I mean, because we're in an interesting time right now where the job market has been dramatically hit with this pandemic. So there's going to be some time as we're coming out of the pandemic to sort of have data be mixed, right? The impacts are really mixed here between potential impact of USMCA and just general recovery in the economy. But I think it's going to be really important for us to, come back together. As Stephen said, a good part of what we're trying to accomplish here is, let's come back to this conversation regularly. Let's keep it at the forefront. Let's measure it, right? Let's look at the facts and look for opportunity to point to its strengths and its challenges, right? I mean, one of the things that we recognize is that it took a number of years before we really kind of took a close look at it and as an agreement. And so it'll be important for us to have an opportunity to do that more frequently as we go forward. So measurement will be important, and we hope to be able to support that kind of work going forward as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think forecasting is extremely difficult right now, but let's think about the footprint that we have to work from. We have over 1,000 Canadian companies here in Southern California, employing over 45,000 people. And they've supported a payroll of $4.4 billion. Now, those are not all jobs that are active, unfortunately, right now, but we have that impact and that momentum coming into the pandemic to come back to and to be able to use as a base for recovery, growth, and response. And I think it's interesting too, when you look at the data on the jobs that are being created by Canadian-owned enterprises here in Southern California, that they pay on average $14,000 more than the average wage here in Southern California. So when Canadian investment comes to LA and Southern California, it's creating really high value, well-paying jobs. And I think that's something we should expect will continue when we get further down the road with respect to recovery.
Makes sense. COVID really has thrown all things out of whack in terms of forecasting, because we now have to forecast this small, hopefully, section of it, which looks like recovery as we talk about, but then the larger implications of how our entire kind of market and business foundations have really evolved and shifted, some through forced acceleration, as we talked about earlier, and some through new insights and new innovations that are coming to light. So that's really important to hear. I know there are some questions also on some visa issues and some of those. I'm going to suggest to our audience here that those are probably best left with immigration and legal experts right now, especially given those announcements that are coming out of not only the U.S. but with those border restrictions in play. So I wouldn't want to put our two experts on the line because they don't happen to be visa and immigration experts. But I will say that I have seen some of those questions, and I want to acknowledge those questions, and they're really important. But it'll be great if you contact some other folks, and we certainly will work with Maple, and the consulate is always working to get better information out to you. And so we'll make sure we put together something hopefully very soon down the line, once we all get our acts in gear and USMCA implements, to getting some real vital information on the immigration and visa front too. I can assure you of that. So sorry if we don't quite answer your questions on that front. So let's try to go to another question, which is really about, gentlemen, the business sectors that you're seeing or your members are seeing that are ripe for opportunities right now for Canadian business and investment down here in Southern California. And then on the flip side, what would you encourage Southern Californians to look at into when they think of doing business with and in Canada?
I think if we look north firstly, and let's just go up the coast a little bit to our closest, largest Canadian market, Vancouver. It may be surprising that it's only 2.5 hours away. That's actually closer than flying to Austin, Texas. And when SoCal businesses arrive in Vancouver, they're going to find a thriving tech sector, a robust filmed entertainment industry, and a fellow West Coast city that drives and shares a lot of the same values about the environment, and it has a reputation for innovation, historically strong ties with Asian markets. And that sounds pretty familiar to us here. And so we see Vancouver businesses active here as well, whether it's Ani Group or BOSA in real estate development. There's a company called Phoenix MD in San Diego doing advanced molecular design work very successfully. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities between SoCal and Ontario and Quebec. And we have a lot of Maple members in the Greater Toronto area, and now Waterloo and Cambridge, that are ready to help them grow their business, that can understand what it means to come from Southern California and to how the importance of our relationship. So I think those are some looking north opportunities for SoCal businesses.
So I think that there is also a lot of opportunity here, right? On a couple of our delegations, we've taken Stephen Chung, head of World Trade Center Los Angeles North, and I love being in the room where he says, "Hey, we have a lot of money to spend. Come on down and get it," right? So there are a lot of businesses coming down to LA and Southern California. Measure M represents a significant opportunity for Canadian businesses who can play a role in LA's massive investment in infrastructure. And there's the 28 by 28 initiative for projects that can help LA County prep for the coming 2028 Olympics. In fact, earlier this year, a Waterloo, Ontario-based company, Rideco, was awarded a $28 million contract for LA Metro to pilot an on-demand ride service. And this is the largest microtransit contract ever awarded. So they're really working hard to get ready for a fabulous 2028 Olympics. But then we've also got artificial intelligence, machine learning, esports, media and entertainment technologies, cyber technology, and other enabling technologies for hosting the Olympic Games and other major sporting events that are going to be happening in the region. So, more broadly speaking, Southern California, is a great place for Canadian businesses to come. And there's a wonderful welcome mat here, both, with the Consul team and with Maple Business Council and the Canadian Expat Group. So we think it's a great place to come and try and grow your business.
Great, thanks, gentlemen. I'm going to ask at least one final question from the group, and then I may sort of sum it up with an even an ultimate question, final question, which allows us then to wrap things up, and also make sure other people and you yourselves, who have many Zoom calls, I know, having to get to, and webinars that you can get to your next one. But before we do that, real estate, what are you seeing, or how are you seeing that interest among California developers about investing in Canada? Are you seeing that? We obviously know about the snowbirds coming out down here, and we know why they do, but what's what interest and what are you seeing on the front of California real estate development happening up in Canada?
It's interesting. I spent most of my early career in the industry, and a company that's headed by a Vancouverite, Hudson Properties. When we were in Vancouver last, I took a look down the street and saw a building, titled or signed for Hudson, and so it's an example of an individual who knows the Canadian marketplace, has been successful here in Southern California for years, sold his company to GE Capital some years ago. It turns out my wife worked for this organization, so I know just a little bit about it. But to see them going north and taking the success that they've had here and putting it into a marketplace that they know is solid. The real estate market in Canada is solid, backed by a great banking system, pension funds and so forth that will help come alongside developers. So there should be a lot of attention focused on major Canadian cities and growing real estate investments there. And would be happy to talk about that more offline.
Thanks, Rob. Stephen, anything to add on that one?
Just actually looking southbound, we have the vantage point of, working with companies like Brookfield and Avis and Young, who are, growing Southern California. And then we've had some great conversations with Bone Structure out of Quebec, building residential homes using a steel home format. And they have a growing presence in Southern California as well. So it's really exciting to see the momentum going both north and south.
That's so true. And speaking of that momentum, as we look to these ideas of celebration, implementation, and really, recovery always sounds better, feels better, and looks better with a bit of fun and smiles. What are some fun facts that either of you, both of you, would be able to share with our audience? Because of course our audience is live. They're made up of Californians and Canadians, and then this is going to be recorded and broadcast as well later to a whole host of people. So what kind of fun facts would you share about Southern California to Canadians who may not know, other than the obvious, that there's plenty of sunshine and all that good stuff, and what would you share for Californians about Canada, that what they may not know about, other than our great mountain landscape and seas and fishing and stuff?
Sure. So Zaib, I'll talk a little bit about California, right? So again, I think we mentioned earlier that California is home to the largest diaspora of Canadians in the world. And I used to, early on, when you look at some of the estimates of the number of Canadians that live in Southern California, I used to say that if you're in a room with 40 or more people, there's at least one other Canadian there with you. So it's pretty interesting to see that. And, when we run into fellow Canadians, the barrier sort of comes down. There's something we have in common immediately, which is great. So that's something to think about. But, think about California, as a large economy. It's the largest state economy in the U.S. and it's nearly the size of Canada's economy. I think we said earlier about 80 some odd percent. So it's a significant economy for us to think about. It's also a place that Canadians come to visit on a regular basis. So it's the second largest source of visitors to LA. And I'm sure that Disney is thinking about that and in its marketing as it looks to open Disneyland in July. Hopefully that can still move forward, but that's important. Something to not forget is, and this was surprising to us as we really started to dive into the data, is LA is the manufacturing capital of the US. And there's a lot you can make here. I mentioned earlier the co-founder of a startup that says, hey, this is going to be the best place for us to figure out how to build a car. We'll likely go back to Canada for some of those technologies and hopefully build it there. But, there's a lot of advanced technology here that we can leverage and think about it, from the perspective of the roots in the aerospace and defense industries that grew up here in Southern California. Think about, companies like SpaceX and so forth that are here. So there's that. 137 miles of beaches from San Diego to LA. So that's fun. And the largest ports complex in the world. So it's pretty exciting. And, we think that it's a great place to come and visit and come and do business.
And I think California, has the opportunity to really just step back and think about how close we have in a neighbor in Canada. I mean, Canada ships more exports to California than any other US state except for Michigan. And the majority of their crude oil that leaves the port of Vancouver feeds our California refineries. And when we look at Canadian investment here in Southern California, you see representation from at least 8 of Canada's 10 provinces. And of the 10 top Canadian parent companies by Southern California employment, 7 of those are actually from Ontario. So sometimes we think, Ontario is on the other side of the continent. It's, Ontario is here and employing people, creating jobs, helping grow Southern California. And, right here in Southern California, as we think about the Canadian-owned jobs in the state, 67% of Canadian-owned establishments and 73% of Canadian-owned jobs are right here in Southern California. And as we mentioned earlier, they pay a very good wage. Canada is the largest purchaser of our agricultural products. And it just astounded us too when we did the research together with the consulate last year, that when you actually look at our exports internationally, on a per capita basis, which the economists tell us is really one of the more stringent ways of looking at economic data, Canada actually numbers as the #1 export market for California when you look at it on a per capita basis, given the smaller population of Canada, and yet the tremendous volume that we do in exporting and importing together. So I think those just underline the fact that our relationship is a lot closer than maybe what geography looks like on a map. And as Rob said, it's our friends, it's our families, our neighbors, our business colleagues and associates that have a connection back to Canada that we just need to discover a little bit more. And when we do so, celebrate.
That's great. Thanks for those, not just fun facts, but also very illuminating facts on the nature and purpose of the economy and that economic relationship between the two great territories that are Canada and Southern California. So look, thanks so much for joining us today. Robert Kelle, chairperson of the board, and of course, Stephen Armstrong, president and director of Maple Business Council. And you've been great partners throughout this series on USMCA, helping us host not only with you, but also with our business council friends in Nevada and Arizona, which this consulate hubbed out of Southern California helps represent. And really want to thank you for that. We're a week away from Canada Day and USMCA Day. So I want to remind everyone to get those hashtags out, USMCA Day and Canada Day USA, and the business things that you're doing and the organizational things that you're doing, and also on the fun things that you're doing. It's going to be a big week next week for a number of reasons for both our countries. And it's been a real great pleasure to talk with you both today and to give the audience a little better glimpse into what's going on when that day arrives next week and what happens during implementation. So thanks everyone. Thank you both, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Zaib.
Thank you, Zaib.